Gerard,
Hello, how's it going?
all good. How are you, man?
Very good, very good.
Good.
It's
Good to
nice to
see
be
you.
here. Looking forward to, talking coaching and everything else and sharing some great ideas with you. So it's going to be good.
Yeah, great to have you. Great to have you. Pracademic is what it says.
Pracademic, yeah.
What does it mean?
It's a good phrase because I think then when you talk about academia, that the role of the coach is changing, and certainly what we're seeing now more than ever before is that the coach has evolved into someone who's got incredible experiences for sure, but has got an academic background. So
Yeah.
perhaps they're a qualified teacher. They've got a master's degree. They've got a PhD, a doctorate in some sort of field of expertise, or at least they're quite studious. So even though typically, most coaches will go through a coach education pathway that'll be, UEFA B, UEFA A, maybe UEFA Pro if they're lucky or whatever. Typically, I would say a pracademic is somebody that's got the background of both. They've got the academic knowledge and theoretical understanding, but they've got the practical experiences that they know how to apply the theory into practice. So they've got a foot probably in both camps, and I think it's an unfair advantage to some degree because I think if you're only practical and you haven't got that theoretical understanding of why do you do what you do, and what's the science that underpins that you practice. I think there's a danger there. Certainly being an academic will allow you to think critically for sure, right? But equally, if you go the other extreme, often a lot of academics they don't know how to apply it in the real world, or
Yeah.
they'll use overly complex terminologies, jargon, and you'll often get a bit of resistance in football because some people go, "Ah, it's not football," So, pracademic is somebody that's got a bit of both. They've got the practical and the academic, so they're a pracademic.
Okay. And how do you move, let's say, between two worlds, these two worlds?
Yeah, well, I try and make sure that, again, for me, coaching is an art that's underpinned by science. There's some things that are just not quantifiable. I think obviously because of the dynamic and nuanced nature that is coaching. It's a relationship business. It's forever changing. You're dealing with people. You're dealing with humans, right? I think it's so important that we've got to build a relationship with other people, but when we're sharing information, the clarity in the message is really key. So that's how I move in between the two worlds. Is that, again, I said it at the start of that sentence of coaching is an art that's underpinned by science. I'll have my theoretical background and I'll have certain things that I know based on the science, or I'll have a higher level understanding of what needs to be applied when and where. But I can draw from my own practical experiences as well as my instincts, my smell, what I feel
Yeah.
in the moment, because it is intuitive. You have to rely on what you feel in certain moments.
Yeah. Okay. Well, interesting. Yeah. I think you're completely right. Especially lately, you see a lot of young coaches in the pro academies that know almost any theory out there. They choose within football a specific theory that they specialize in. They make it their own. They use it and they gain more knowledge on that specific item. I think that's, and you are an example of that as well. But you also have this coach education background where it also comes together as well, which not everybody has. But I think that's something that is unique about you. You also teach.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of coaches now that you see more and more specialists, aren't you?
Yeah.
And people are becoming really studious. I mean, one of the biggest reasons why I went and studied my masters and coach education, I never aspired to be a coach developer, but I ended up gravitating into it probably because of, the skills that I acquired and developed. And I think probably one of the biggest advantages I'd say to people is, be really curious about what you see and where you're. Sorry if you can see here.
Yeah, you are in your home office, and
Yeah.
well, you have some young ones running around, right?
Yeah, 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. It's normal.
Well, we've all been there when you have 3-year-olds. Sometimes
Exactly.
sometimes. Yeah.
But I think, like I'm seeing so many coaches now share study visits that they're doing off their own bat, where they've looked into 1v1 duels, or they've looked into set pieces, or they've looked into postural orientation or scanning or whatever it is, but they've not necessarily got a degree for it. And that was something for me. I'm constantly searching more and more about ideas around the use of feedback. I've always been passionate about communication and practice design and how to develop players that can become these adaptable performers, these self-learners, these problem solvers, whilst tapping into the perception of what the player's seen. So where they look in, where they're searching for information to come up with their own adaptable movement solution. And what I did...
Why did it trigger you? Why that specific part?
Because it's the game.
Anywhere, but this is what you take.
Yeah, because it's the game, because we know that over 85% of the decisions that players make is with their eyes. The information that players receive whilst playing the game is through their eyes, over 85%. Players are making decisions based on time, space, and number variations. And obviously, there's more awareness around scanning and the importance of that, and we'll go into that in a bit more detail now. So I was thinking, well, a dominant coaching behavior alongside that is feedback, and when we're communicating to players. So there's an area there where we can impose our bias or our answer to the player that can limit what they see in the environment. The practice designs that we design, how do we tap into and develop players to search? But then certain practices will be restricted where they're not having to look for any information. A cone doesn't move. So there's no actual information that's coming from a cone or a metal mannequin. Often a lot of coaching designs are focused around like patterns and things like that. So that's why I was curious. And then, to answer that as well, finishing off, I didn't want to just go down that road and come up with loads of great ideas like you do, and we coach, but not have anything per se to show for it. So I wanted to try and do a study where I'm really passionate about this. I want to be an expert in it. And if I can do it as part of a PhD or a master's, which I've obviously done, and I'm a qualified teacher as well, I'll have a qualification after it. I'll be recognised as a particular leading thinker or expert in that field, and I can build a career off of it. Yeah. So I've got PhD and I've got the experiences, and that's why I'm on that PhD journey now. And so I've got the best of both worlds, rather than just do something and then 10 years down the line go, you know what, that would have been a great PhD study, and maybe someone else got there first. So that was some of the motivations. But
when did you realize maybe yourself, when you were on the pitch, okay, these maybe it was, okay, this is the way we do it, which is a very dangerous way of thinking, but this is the way I've always done it, but this is not the way to do it. This is not optimal for players. When was the moment, okay, we need to give them more freedom so they can create their own feedback, that they can create their own solutions? When did you realize, okay, I need to change my own direction in this as well?
Well, I've always actually thought that way, believe it or not. Obviously, it'll have evolved and got better with the mentors that I've had exposure to. I think I learned in reverse, because I played for a club and I came through a coach education pathway that was very much freeze, tell the players what to do, move them in, you're physically dragging them, Yeah. I remember doing my level 1. There was this game called Hot Potato. And I remember being 16 years old thinking, this can't be any further. Whoever came up with that idea is crazy. It used to be a game where basically treat the ball as a hot potato, or it was almost like a grenade. So you throw the ball, oh, I don't want it, you have it.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, that is criminal, because you're teaching kids to get rid of the ball.
Yeah.
So there was no surprise that when you used to look at teams in England, they used to just get it and go, boof, and direct. Charles Hughes, 3 passes or less, let's get the ball in the opponent's half. So, and I came through that education, and that education of stuck in the mud, and, you're trying to run around and get people's balls and smash them out of play. Or being a youth team player. I was a youth team player. Chris Waller was actually the first team coach, and I was a youth team player for Halifax Town's under 19s, under 18s, and the coach would be freeze, and it'd be negative, and it'd be, and you had a fear of failure. You feared making mistakes or trying things. So as a player, it would crumble me. So when I ended up going into coaching, I probably went from that extreme to the complete opposite, which was enthusiastic, praise the effort, not just praising the talent, but recognize, good try. What can we do differently here? and trying to see learning as like a journey with the player. And probably because as well, I never played at a top level. I think that was an advantage because often if I didn't know the answer, it was okay. Like it'd be, let's figure this out together. I learned a lot from observing, and I would set challenges to players. And I probably learned by accident more than by design. It will have been by design as you get more knowledge and you go on more courses and you meet more people. But in the interim, it was by accident for sure, where I was just going, actually, this is working. Like I've just set you a challenge now and go, all right, show me different ways that you can beat a player with a pass or a dribble. Try this, and players would do it, and I'd go, wow, they've just come up with something that I wouldn't have thought of. Whereas if I'd have done what I was taught, which was, you see you make a mistake, correct that. So it's typically error correction, right? I would always be like this, because most coaches they're ready to stop the practice and tell them all the knowledge they've got, and like they see the player as this empty vessel that needs to be filled. And I would often be like, I'm not sure, that doesn't really sit well with me. And then obviously the more you learn, you're thinking, well, let's just see what the player does. And the player does something that you've never seen before, and you're thinking, well, that's great, But if I'd have showed it my demonstration of what that solution should have been in that moment, I've potentially killed creativity and exploration and experimentation. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Oh, but for sure, and it's so recognizable because in the UEFA C and especially UEFA B course that I did as well, you are judged on the stop moments. So the moments that you stop the session, and how do you interact, and what can you do to influence that specific millisecond of a moment. And then you have to step in and you have to shout stop, and it's exactly what they teach you. And we've all been there. If you do it 3 times, the players will be, here he goes again. You see body language dropping, and are we going to have this type of session again? Which is so annoying. And when you do like a possession play and you just let it go, they're having the most fun in the world, and the intensity is 10 times higher. And you got me thinking here. I was a coach like that as well, and I had this pattern type of plays. This is the way I want to do it. And if the number 4 has the ball, you have to run up to him like this and stop. You're doing it wrong and blah blah blah. And then you were coaching one player, and the other 15 were just watching. Okay, what the fuck is he doing?
What's happening there?
No, I completely agree. And what you see a shift now that I think we all have to admit that as well. It is how it's what was taught 10 years ago. And I haven't been on a course for a while, so I don't know exactly how it is now. But at least in, let's say, the practical side, you see a lot of coaches that doing much more implicit things, are much more creative, just letting it flow and just being, let's say, the encourager from the side instead of stop. Okay, change. The narrative of coaching is changing completely.
I think there's definitely been a paradigm shift towards, rather than going purely around like explicit learning, as you just said there, implicit learning. I think there still is a place for some of the maybe more like traditional coaching. Sure. I think there's a danger of dualisms, and what we don't want to say is this is good and this is bad, because as me and you both know, like there's a sweet spot somewhere, and it all depends. Coaching depends. I think for anyone listening, it's understanding that what are the trade-offs. If you only do that, what are the limitations of that? If you only do this, what are the limitations of this? Yeah. And that's where my PhD evolved into. We've created models where, and based on the research that we're still doing and have done, where we've looked at, coaching in like abstract, if you like, and reaction, where coaches are traditionally, giving too much information, explicit rules, which we know breaks down under pressure. These set patterns, but the problem is if they go in a game that doesn't happen, what do? Yeah. And the players develop this dependency to the coach, and if they see a problem,
and once it doesn't happen, they look to the side. Okay, what do I have to do now?
Exactly. But then equally, too much exploration can be bad as well, because if you give them too much to think about and see, that can be quite difficult for them to, optimally grip onto. Yeah. Well, what does it make sense? But then equally, sometimes playing in confusion can be an advantage as well, because you're experimenting. So for coaches, just understanding what player needs what, when, where, and why. And it's not that you can't give direct instruction, because sometimes you may need to short circuit that decision-making process, if you like, and give them an answer. But then my question to the coach would then be, how can you know that they've understood? So feedback given isn't necessarily feedback received and understood. So how do you check for understanding? Can the player be in control of how and when they receive feedback and the frequency of it and things like that? And also just tap into what the player's seen. Or are you always imposing your perception? Yeah. And if you do give them an answer, how can you lead next with a question? So then you're allowing them to connect dots and explore. Yeah. Versus always giving them an answer. Try and give them a problem to solve, because the game's based on problems. And they have to be adaptable, and they have to solve problems throughout the whole 90 minutes beyond. And we can't play the game for them. So if we can develop these more adaptable players, sure, it's a good thing. I think coach education's getting better. The UEFA has just revamped a lot of the licenses, but like anything, there's still more stuff that we can do better, and still got a long way to go.
Yeah, I completely agree. So you're talking about this PhD. Can you explain a little bit how this research looks like, and literally what you're doing in your PhD? Because it's interesting to hear more from an academic side how you approach this as well.
Yeah, so obviously my PhD is looking at the use of, in simple terms, the use of feedback and how coaches use feedback to guide the attentional search of a player. Okay. So where they look. And there's different types. Typically, coaches will give, if we look at augmented information as information that's given external, coaches will tend to plan their training loads. And they might go, right, I'm going to do my interventions during the breaks. And we're working for this many minutes, this intensity, this is the rest and recovery. And I'll give feedback in those. I won't stop the game. Or sometimes coaches will go, no, I'm going to stop during the practice, or I'll do drive-by coaching, or I'll do whatever. So obviously we know that, but the limitations with that is that it tends to be quite prescriptive. And the theory and the research that I'm doing my PhD is looking at how can coaches use feedback that, rather than giving it concurrently, which is during action, or terminally, which is after action, could be in the breaks, could be immediately after he's made that pass, you give him feedback or whatever it is. And it can be verbal, it can be haptic, it can be visual. Rather than doing it that concurrently or terminally, how can you give feedback transitionally, where you're not telling them what to do, where to look, or how to move, but you're simply guiding the player so that they can then search for information from the environment and come up with their own solution in the next scenario. So it's preparing them, it's transitionally preparing for that next instance.
Can you give an example?
An example could be, well, let's say like I set a challenge. I'm giving clues, I'm giving challenges to a player where it might be, how can your pass or your dribble eliminate two or more defenders?
Okay.
Now, I've been quite, sometimes, and that's okay, I can narrow my focus. So I've said pass or dribble. I could be more open. I could say, how can your action, and then they decide. But what I'm doing is I'm setting them a problem. They've got to then show me. And I'm not always looking for a verbal response. So then they might go, oh, wow, there's a great opening there. But I'm going to break the line. I'll split two defenders there with one pass. Or actually, I can play a little disguise pass to the outside of my foot, and I can clip it, or I can ozil it, or I can... So they'll come up with the solutions. Or it might be that I'll put certain constraints on the practice. So whether it's around how they can solve the problem. So, for example, we're in a possession game. It could be a positional possession. It could be a directional small side game. It could be anything. You're on one touch or 4+. If you take two touches, or let's say two touches or three, it's an automatic free kick to the opposition. Yeah. So the players know. So if you play the pass to me, I've got to recognise, can I play that first time? And I'll pop it off, and you'll see the ball going. I've done this with top-level players and grassroots players. If they take a touch, and they probably could have played it first time, it then helps them reflect and go, actually, I could have... So now they're forced in a decision where they have to dribble, or they have to stay on the ball, and they have to manipulate. And that's okay as well, because then it creates those duels, those 1v1s, 1v2s. So then now, how do they get out of trouble? And what you're doing, and there might be times where they'll decide they may have to take a touch because they can't, maybe it's come at an awkward pass or it's bounced, so they've got to control it. So how do they control the ball and the space they want to move into? So now you're getting them to play in the future. So in order to put that constraint on them, they have to look and go, Tom's available. I can play into Tom now. Or I can't, or you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to drive on the ball. Or I'm going to step in, or I'm going to manage the tempo. Well, going one touch. Now I'm going to slow it down and drag people, and then we play. Yep. So now, then you can take the constraints off. No limitations. Show me, and again, players will then show you different variations of how they can solve that problem. What you'll notice, even in the two examples there, and if we go back to how can your pass eliminate two or more defenders? I'm not saying to them, now I've dictated it could be a pass. And the other one I might say an action or a dribble. But I've not told them how to do it. They can decide, you know what, I can play around the block. I can play through, I can play over, I can use a chip.
So you're also not saying when they can decide on their own?
Exactly. So at any point in the session, they might not break the line until right later on. And that was the right moment. It's come off once in the practice, but it's fine. Yeah. They've recognised I can actually, the defender in a tight low block, I can play into my number 10. He's turned and got on the back foot and scored. Brilliant, well done. So it's about using and phrasing the language linked to your vocab. So if your club vocab's breaking lines, counter pressing, whatever it is, how you structure that sentence so that the player understands, but equally you're not imposing your perception. They have to then search, scan, whatever word we want to use, look for information, and they make the decision in the moment. So it prepares them for that next action. And the beauty
this is very clear. So this is a way to influence their decision making. You're not pushing anything on them. They can choose whatever they can do whenever they want. But now let's go a little bit more to that academic side. How do you measure then that this is a successful way of influencing your players? Because then you have to kind of find a quality research or a discussion with the player or measure it with video. How do you measure this?
Well, there's different ways. I mean, a lot of the studies we've got in the pipeline, we've done semi-structured interviews, which is great because, you know, it allows an organic conversation. You've got your script of questions you might ask a player or a coach, certain questions linked to what you want to find out, but it's semi-structured in that based on the answers, you can go off in different directions if you need to. Doing things around like thematic analysis, so seeing if certain themes may pop up based on answers or even observations, using video, you know, putting eye tracking goggles on players so you're seeing where they're looking. But again, you know, people listening, you've got to be careful with that as well, because we know players make decisions based on time, space, and numbers. You know, you have to perceive in order to act, and you have to act in order to perceive. That's James Gibson. But in that, where you look doesn't necessarily mean where you're attending to. So they might pick up that the tracker's looked at the hips or wherever, but that doesn't mean that he's not getting information or her from you know, outside the periphery or whatever.
I'm thinking, this is maybe strange, very strange, but it pops into my head. I recently saw this clip of Guti that he's dribbling parallel to the 16-yard, and he back heels it into a player that nobody's have seen, but he already saw it.
Yeah.
What you mean? So where he's looking is not what he's perceiving, probably. But okay, this is the most elite example ever. But okay, I think everybody has an idea with it.
Exactly. And also, like I put in goggles on coaches, you know, I quite like that. But to see where did the coaches look. Doing observations where you're going in situ, so you're evaluating session intentions versus what actually happened.
Yeah.
And also the practice design, because certain designs of practices will limit how well players can search for information from the environment based on the design and the constraints of conditions. So we would be able to evaluate that. And then the type of feedback coaches use. So if they use feedback that's focusing on the mechanics of a skill, which is how me and you will have come through Coach Ed, you know, very technical detail, corrective information. But the danger with that is that it leads to what's called an internal focus of attention. So players will look at the mechanics. They're not looking for based on the problem in the environment and coming up with their own solution. So it's the language of how you can get them to look externally, search, rather than focus on the mechanics of the skill. And we'll be able to measure that. We'll be able to look at the phrases and then see how that's impacted the player. It's interesting. I'm using decision making, and you are, because that's a term that listeners in coaching and football will relate to. But with academic, it depends on what, I guess, theory or paradigm you're coming from. From ecological dynamics and sort of ecological psychology, nonlinear pedagogy, they would talk less about decision making, because that implies like a top-down approach of linear thinking. They would talk more about this like optimal grip that players are searching for information, they're identifying and gripping onto, versus like information processing, which would see learning and performance as linear. I think, if we put this in simple terms, because not everyone might understand, I think it's so important that coaches see learning and performance as non-linear, because they're going to go through periods of accelerated improvement and periods of, the regression, as you and I both know, in performance as well. And we've got to understand that, where's that player at in that journey? What's affecting them? The context. Is it physiological changes? Is it body? Is it injuries? What is it? Psychosocial stuff. And then obviously, how do you individualize your approach to tap into the player? So everything we do, and a lot of the research I'm trying to publish, is around this individualized approach. So we really are focused on their individual wants and needs.
Okay, yeah, pretty clear. I think what you're saying is very interesting, and everybody can take it to their, let's say, own practical situation, that we tend to judge the outcome on what a player learns. So maybe you can even think it in patterns or whatever, or what outcomes or technicals. Okay, we're going to learn you this, and if you can do it, then you have developed. But the development process is not the outcome. It takes maybe a lot more time to get the right outcome, but they are already learning.
Exactly. Well, you just nailed it. I mean, how we're assuming that learnings took place, but how do we know? And if we do things based on that short-term model, if you like, and that's often why coaches prefer, I believe, to design practices that are decontextualized from a game, because with a game, it's chaos. So if it's a proper game and it's organized and it's reality-based, players will be moving quickly. So often for the coach or even the untrained eye, it's difficult to see what they want to see.
Yeah.
They'll often prefer to design these isolated practices or these like small group stuff, because it's like, I can control it in a drill. I can see you and you're moving at a speed that it's not too fast. It's slow enough that I can.
You're doing yourself a favor instead of the player.
Exactly. And they can give all the information rich to the player and go, all right, figure it out. And then we'll progress into a more game-like activity, and you're expected to be able to transfer that. Yeah. But we know that isn't the case, because it doesn't look like the game. And players are then having to relearn what to do. So it's more important that we create environments that are representative of their game, not just the game, but actually their game. So what's their individuality? What's their identity as a player? But also, when I say their game, it's how old are they? Yeah. Are they playing 7v7, 8v8, 5v5, 9v9, 11v8? What are they playing? Because, you made reference to a top level. We can all do that. We do that. Chelsea, Man City, whoever, Real Madrid, doesn't matter. But that doesn't necessarily relate to their game. That's the adult game.
Yeah.
So it's so important for coaches to think, what does their game look like at their level? Design stuff around that, and then try to be really good at being purposeful in your observation to give the feedback necessary where needed that enhances that player's problem-solving skills.
If I think of this right now, while you're saying this, we are talking, let's say we're talking about 11-year-olds. They are half a meter shorter than us, so they already see things completely different, and we are from the outside and they are right in the middle, and we're like, why didn't you see it? Okay, an 11-year-old, he's not even connecting the dots between three players, and he's half a meter shorter, so he's looking against. He doesn't have an overview. It's good to realize that you approach it completely different, and not only going down to your knees won't solve all the problems. It's looking into their perspective and context.
I love that. I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
But then how do you look? Because that's a little bit maybe of a counter approach, that you have a lot of individual coaches at this point, and they're working individually with players, much more on skills. It's maybe more skills oriented than first touch, turning, fast moves. Do you think that is additional or is still effective, or would you only say, no, I would go mainly for, let's say, realistic games for that specific group or whatever?
No, because I think it's a great question, because you've opened up this debate that's often a lot on social media around like technique and skill. What do we mean by both? Or practices like this and technical stuff, and then more game stuff. I would actually say you can work on all. Like I'll work on first touch, I'll work on dribbling, ball mastery, the ability to manipulate your body to protect the ball, whatever it may be. Because for me, technique is a decision it's a solution that's applied based on the information from the environment. So I try not to muddy the water, because I think if we isolate, this is just my own perspective. If we isolate like technique and then skill, well, that's no good. I can have the best form in the world unopposed, and I could look like a gymnast. But if I can't put it into a game, how many players do we see like that? They're great at clipping the ball from here and hitting the ball over there. It's great.
Well, you see it a lot now.
Where someone's closing you down,
Yeah. No, but you see it a lot now. That, by the way, maybe you can move a little bit closer to the screen, and your sound is a little bit better. But that you see on Instagram, you have these crazy. Well, they look pretty cool. They have these nets in the goal with 4 corners, and you see these players turning and think, well, this guy can really play. But then you put him into a context with a proper defender just going to kill him. But for example,
no, it's true.
Then it's completely different. But
completely different, yeah. And that's why, for me, I would design those games. I would actually, but again, it's not, let's put them into a ULearnbly 11 or AVO or something that's really complex. You can still layer stuff, can't you? And you can intertwine stuff. But I would be putting them in games or activities where there's, even if it is, let's say, unopposed, if there's no defender, but there's some sort of contextual interference. So even if it's working on passing, receiving, but knowing the way to pass them, you could have players playing in and out of each other without bumping into each other.
Yeah.
And their objective is to try and find ways to play in between. So you've got groups of 3s or whatever the numbers are, and they could be all interchanging. Or it could be that you're in a game and you're in a 2v2 or 3v3 or a 1v2 or a. But again, there's certain rules of the practice, but you're allowing them to solve that little miniature problem. That's how I would develop those. So for me, it's the same. It's a movement solution, and I'm a big believer in this, that every player has their own adaptable, unique movement solution. If you look at any player, they're all different. Ronaldo has a different style to Mbappe, different to Virgil van Dijk, different to. So if we know that, and you said it earlier, if it's reference to height, my physical profile as an adult is different to yours. We're different. So for me to demonstrate potentially something to you, the correct model solution to copy, would be wrong for you anyway, because I'm 5'9" and I'm chunky. If I'm then dealing with someone who's built like Lukaku, it's not the same. So, it's more important that we get them to become better at understanding how to move in their own bodies. What does their style look like? And get them, by giving them a problem to solve, let them figure it out. But do it in those contexts that we're not steering too far away from a game. Because if it's too far away from the game, we're not preparing them for that game. That's the reality. They're going to go into a game and still really not know what to do. And then they're always going to look to the bench for the answer. And that's where, for me, I think we've got to be better as coaches. If we say we want players that think for themselves, self-learners, adaptable, then we've got to do it.
Yeah, well, I completely agree. And there are 2 things that I'm hearing. One is, okay, if you have different type of players, and this is more, let's say, a little bit more implicit style way of learning. Okay, just move as fast with the ball.
Right.
Beat your opponent is completely different and is maybe the right approach for a lot of players. Then instead of saying, okay, I want you on your toes and I want you to make a scissor and then beat him 1v1 on the right side. Yeah, if speed, in that opinion of that kid or player, is okay, I'm going to turn pretty early, whatever, I'm going to do what I prefer and I'm going to beat him to the left because I've turned my back, whatever he does, then that's his solution. And he's going to end up with the same result that you are looking for, but he's only going to do it in his own way. Yeah. And I think that's what we're looking for.
Yeah. Well, I would, like, even if you say like attacking, so I would say like even in attacking, if we talk about attacking principles or forward, I would often go across these sort of 5 S's. So how does the player rely on these? Is it strength? Is it speed? You reference speed. Is it skill, their ability to just unlock something, do something creative? Yep. Is it through surprise? So a bit of disguise and deception. Or is it through selection? So have they've got options and they can combine, and then it's understanding how do they solve that across those 5 S's. But that will look very different across each player. And certain players, they can't rely on strength because they're not physically strong. That isn't their profile. They're not going to pin a centre half or use their body to spin or whatever. And if they get close to a defender like a Virgil van Dijk, they'll struggle potentially. So they might have to rely more on surprise or speed. But if they're not quick, what are they relying on? They can't rely on strength, they can't rely on speed. So what are they relying on? Surprise. So then they might be that player who's quite intricate and looks for the selection, the combinations and drawing people in. If they haven't got that, what else? So then that's where, and that's another useful tool for coaches to look at is what's the individuality of the player?
Yeah, well, and now the challenge for the coaches comes because I think if we discuss this, we all know we shouldn't play with the PlayStation joystick. We should have them find their own. But once you are alongside that pitch and you see things happening, that's when you have to bite your teeth and you, especially in the beginning, if it's not very natural to you, you have to say to yourself, okay, every question, every remark, I have to look at what am I going to say or how am I going to say it. And it takes a while, I think, for coaches to learn this.
Completely agree. I think we're still developing it. I think every coach is different as well. Conte is very different to, whoever, to, someone like myself or you or Klopp so I think it's understanding your style. I think as well, I'll give you one thing which might be useful. I always remember years ago being on the Advanced Youth Award. This was back in 2014. And Alex Inglethorpe at the time was doing the under-21s at Liverpool. He's obviously now academy director. Been at Tottenham, been at various clubs. Yeah. And Alex Inglethorpe said, before I say anything, this is in reference to a training or a game, like you said, he said, before I say anything, I always think, is this going to help or hinder? And to me, that has stuck with me since 2014. I just think, wow, is that going to help? Because I think often we're not doing it in a bad place. We genuinely want to help. But we could actually be hindering. And it's understanding like how much information we're giving to that player now. Are we overloading them? Are we not? Is it going to help or is it going to hinder? So that's a great one.
Or are we saying it because we are the coach and we think we need to say something and maybe we need to make some sounds just to get some frustration out or whatever. But some things are also, okay, maybe sometimes it's even showing other people that I am the coach. So it means that this went wrong. So I have to say something because that's what everybody expects from me.
Yeah, whether it's the fans or the board of directors or chairman or parents or whatever,
so but that's I think the next step. Okay, in this case it is creating adaptable players and you're looking into which style of coaching, which type of sessions work the best. So that's step number one. There are loads of other theories out there that also work very well, maybe on a different subject. But then the step is, okay, but how do I use it? And am I able to do it? Because we can know it all. We can be this academic, but how do we put it into practice?
Yeah, and that's why pracademic is so key. You've got to be able to transfer it. You can't just have the theory and not know how to do it. And I would be saying, reflect on the design of your practices. What are the session intentions focus around? What are you putting a premium value on? So if you're planning that session, what are you really wanting to see and putting a value on? Do the players know that? How individualized is it? So, because for players, I have this 4C approach within my coaching. So it's choices, competition, challenge, and clarity. There's got to be decision make, problems to solve, consequences. Obviously, there's individual challenges or team. Competition, because that's the game. You want it to be fun, you want it to be motivating, intensity, so on. How you create competition with individuals as well as the wider perspective. But the last one is the clarity. What's the relevance to me and why? That's what the player's asking. So I think how do you do it? Well, it's then thinking, well, what's the relevance for these individuals? How is it individualized? Who's getting what out of today? And how can I help who with what? And then that should hopefully guide and think about the type of questions that you'll ask, your guided questions, or the type of feedback that you're looking to do. And I think when people are planning, they should also think about, what does great look like? What does good look like? What does bad look like? What does unacceptable look like? So they at least have some clear understanding of what those things might be. But don't be wedded to the plan, because we know that changes. Yeah. You have to coach what's in front of you and be adaptable yourself. If we're saying we want these adaptable players, that's not to say that you're going off on tangents, but it's okay. You don't have to get everything that all your objectives achieved in that session. It can be a journey. And that's how I would say people can think about it, is that we're going on a journey with a player, and the player is an individual project, and seeing them as such.
Yeah, well, I completely agree. And then to push the next challenge on you, okay, then you have, let's see, my phone is going off, sorry. And then you have 15 individual projects in front of you. Then it becomes interesting how to manage all those 15 goals, because you have clear what you want for that player, and you have clear what you have installed for maybe other 14 players as well. But how do you keep the balance there? That's an interesting next step.
Yeah, and I think, there's no real short and simple answer to this, other than you've got to plan around what are their strengths as well as what are their areas for development. Because often I think we design practices that are always working on the weaknesses per se, the areas for development. But how often do we work on their strengths and turn their strengths into super strengths? I know some people do that, but I would say, how well do you do it? And is it that you're designing, whether it's sort of informal learning opportunities within the practice, times where players can take themselves out of that session and do something else and come back? Is it a carousel? Is there IDP stuff, individual development, learning stuff that you can do before the session or after the end, or in addition to? Put simply as well, me and you are working tonight. We've got 15 kids. You just gave me that example. We're co-coaching. I might be responsible for 3 players. It could be 5, it could be 1. It depends on how good you are as a coach and what your limit is. I know mine's probably 3. I could do more if I wanted to, but I prefer to laser 3. So I can look at the group. Of course, I'm thinking like, I'm going to stretch this individual, this individual, this individual. And I'll try and measure myself by that. You might be responsible for 3. And within the practice, we've got different responsibilities as well. So let's say you're leading the group sessions, the organization, the transitions, but I'm focused on specific individuals. And you can also touch on a couple. By the end of that practice, everyone's got something, whether it was by design or by accident, based on the activities that they've been involved in and the interactions. At least 6, hopefully, have had some individualized stuff from us as well, in addition to. But we're then ensuring that some players, because it's impossible to cover everybody, and you don't have to. And sometimes facilitating is okay, but the fact that we're really conscious that we're going to, he's a priority today, we need to get more out of him or her, and I'm going to work on this particular strength. I think that's how you do it. And then at the end, even being comfortable with asking the player, you know, what did you get out of today? What did you like most about the session? What did you not like as much? How can I help you better? Be vulnerable, you know, expose yourself to the players and get that feedback and have conversations with them. And they'll tell you, they'll be brutally honest, and they'll say, well, actually, I like this. I didn't like that so much, or I wasn't quite clear on what you wanted there. And it's a good reflective tool for us. And I think that's how you can co-coach, get around the 15 players. You've planned for 15, but then you're looking at specifics as well. And hopefully there's some examples there.
Well, no, it's pretty clear, but it did touch upon, and I think it's good for everybody, that you have to take different roles, and you don't have to give everybody that individual attention every time. If you think that you have 2 or 3 sessions a week, and you have, let's say, in the lowest number, you have 3 individual players or 3 individual goals for each session, and each 5 sessions, they will get that whole session specific attention, and they're gonna get something out of the other sessions anyway. So then it's 1 in 5,
exactly.
which is 1 in 2 weeks, which is fine. So I think that's important. And I think, well, do you think we just summarized we just gave a small preview on the webinar that we're going to do?
Yeah, obviously the webinar we're going to do is going to be really exciting, because it's a lot of the stuff that we've talked about today and we'll be able to expand upon. Effectively, the webinar is going to cover how can you design practices that develop adaptable, self-thinking footballers, problem solvers. How do you use feedback in a way that taps into the perception of the player? And seeing learning as searching, practice as searching. And there's some clear objectives here around that. And we're going to cover practical examples. There'll be theory in there. So they'll get a taste of what some of the theory's saying. Theory that's inspired me, that made me want to look and go, oh, I've never seen that before. Let me find out more about that. And then how can you apply that into an actual football context and football setting?
Okay, great. Yeah, so you gave us a small preview, and these are really the goals that we're going to look into on the 28th.
Yeah,
we're supported, of course, with footage and your theories and slides, etc. So it's you at your best, I think, as an educator.
There'll be loads of footage.
Is what you do. This is what you do. Okay, well, a little bit more about you, because we haven't touched upon you. Yeah, of course, what you do. But besides being a academic, how do you develop yourselves if you find the time?
I'm the same. Like, even doing things like this, I think is still developing you, because you're confirming what you know, and you're testing yourself all the time, right, to stay ahead. Watching the game, but also, you know, I'll read a lot of books, I'll read a lot of papers, I'll read a lot of journal articles. I'm signed up to notifications. So whenever there's new research that's come out around VAR or around COVID or around whatever it may be relating to football, practice design, you know, how players are learning, you know, referees, it could be anything. I'll get those notifications and I'll have a little glance. I'll look over the abstract, and if there's something that I need to look more into, I'll look into it.
So that's scientific journals that you're looking into. Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Yeah, scientific journals, and then also, you know, reading books, reading things like that, listening to podcasts, having WhatsApp groups with some really key people. Like who do you surround yourself with? So, you know, like I created one the other day. There's many that I'm on there, but there was one the other day where I did it with me. A coach is working in a professional club at Premier League level at under 18s. And there's also a guy who's an expert in coach development and learning, but he's got a background in rugby. Okay. And he's worked at international level, and he's an ex-professional rugby player in the Premiership, and he's been a head coach. Worked with players like worked with people like Eddie Jones and people like that. Yeah. And there's another guy there who's come from completely a different world. So that we're football, us two over here, and he's rugby. And the other guy is canoeing, you know, and I'm excited to see how that evolves, that conversation, because I think there's so much we can learn from other sports. It doesn't always have to be invasion sports like football, basketball, and so on. It could be boxing. It could be. So that's how I'll do it. I'll tend to look at other environments and take little things and go, oh, I'll have that and I'll adapt it to suit this. And I think they're little things that other people can do.
Okay, good. But you say journals you read, But books as
Yeah.
well. What's the last book that you read, or what's the book that you're reading now?
There's a few on the go, to be fair. There's one here. This is like a self-promotion. This is a self-promotion for them. Not promoting them. The Best
Okay.
by Mark Williams. How elite athletes are made.
Cool.
High performance one.
Yeah, sure.
High performance content. I'm also rereading stuff from before around like 64 shots and how leaders are made, and so they're things that I'm listening to or reading at the minute.
Okay, and you find the time maybe in the evening or in the morning to sit down and read some pages.
Yeah, 24 hours in a day. How you do that is up to you. Isn't it? It's one of those,
Exactly.
Everyone needs sleep for sure, especially when you got a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old. You're running on fumes, but sleep fast.
You're a guy that has routines in that every morning, every evening, or something.
Yeah, well, I try and have I've got notifications that will remind me to try and do stuff. Whether it's I'm going on Babbel and I'm redoing stuff for my language, whether I'm sending messages to people in French or in other languages, or because again, people think that they don't have time, but then you think they're sat at home watching Netflix, which is great. You can do that as well, but then you've probably wasted 4 hours, and you're like, oh, it's bedtime now. So there's 24 hours in a day, and I think it's how you use it, innit? And you're the same. I mean, it's working efficiently, isn't it? Whether it's you work at the minute, I'm juggling, obviously coaching every day, coach developing, mentoring, reading, being a dad, hopefully a good dad, and doing my PhD alongside running my own businesses or online platforms or whatever. So I think it's just how you juggle.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Yeah, we're a little bit of the same like that, because you also have your platform that you're building on.
Yep.
We're doing exactly the same. So yeah, that's an interesting part, and that's also like almost going down the rabbit hole, being an entrepreneur on the side.
It's not easy.
Yeah, but it's not easy. It's the most, how you said, rewarding struggle as well. So that's a good thing as well. Okay. I actually have one last question before we end it, and then you can be the first one to end it within an hour. Or is there something that you still want to add to keep it a little bit, to get it a little bit more closer to the hour?
No, it's I think everything's been covered really, and obviously, I'm really keen on joining the worlds of like what does the research say, but actually what works in everyday practice, and making sure that you can adapt. And that was one of the reasons why, I set up an online platform called ULearnbly, You Learn Beautifully, where coaches can get a bit of both. And it's similar to you, with this platform, which is amazing. It's a great opportunity that coaches can get different types of information that just sparks that curiosity, doesn't it? So, and that's why I love doing this with you, and it's why we're here, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, the sharing part is what sparks me the most. You just meet so much interesting people, and everybody gives you new insights like you did today, and you can connect with everybody that you didn't connect with, or you didn't really have a reason to connect with. And now you have an alibi to call or contact anybody. But hey, do you have something interesting to share with the coaches that are out there? So even though if you're not, we're doing it from a platform side, but I can definitely recommend everybody just to tap into your phone or LinkedIn or network or whatever, and just see who's out there and who you can learn from. And because it's going to give you so much. And if that's something I've learned from the last, let's say, two COVID years, if you haven't done that, then you're really sleeping. I have to be fair on that. If you haven't touched upon your network in the past 2 years while the bars and restaurants are closed, then you've really been sleeping. I have to be honest about that.
Yeah, I agree. No, I think you got to stay curious. You got to stay curious.
Yeah, for sure.
I might tell you a little story, actually. You've just reminded me of something. So, obviously, COVID is mad because it affects us all in different ways and the world. And I was doing a chat similar to this with one of my good friends, Russell Earnshaw, Rusty. And, the guy's amazing. And I remember him saying to me that he was in lockdown, and he sent a text to basically everyone in his phone, like, how can I help you today? And I can't remember if it was like at 3 o'clock in the morning or whatever it was in the morning. and he got a text back from Eddie Jones, and he was on a Zoom with Eddie at like 4, half 4, whatever, because Eddie goes in the gym always religiously at early hours in the morning, and you know, and obviously Eddie's there like, how can I help you? You know, how can you help me today? What can you? And they had a chat, and some people will have replied and some didn't. And I think the reason why that's interesting is because it just goes to show, like, you know, people could be going through different things, different battles or whatever. It could be anything, work related or not, but just being curious. I mean, this guy's got his phone. He's gone, let's have a chat. And I just think that's incredible, you know. So there's so much that we can do, and you never know where the conversation will lead to. You know, that's the beauty of it.
I agree. Yeah, same way that you reached out to me, and the same way. I tend to use LinkedIn a lot. There's now 4,500 connections there, which 80% is football, and there's always somebody to connect with, and that maybe can bring some interesting, or we can help them with coaching content that we created. And it's just investing time in your network. It's so important.
Good. Agree.
Okay, well, that's a good conclusion. Well, and now the last final question. Then, who maybe from your network should we talk to next?
I would say there's a lot. There's a lot, really. I would actually try, if you're interested, to try somebody like Russell, you know, who's outside of football, because I don't think it always needs to be football people.
Oh, sure.
So I think it's good to get other sports in, because good thing with Rusty as well is he's worked in football. He's a consultant. He's done stuff for the FA. He's done stuff with Google, with England Hockey, with you name it. So he's got a good understanding. Also, you know, going a bit out there, how many female people have you had? How many female guests?
Well, we're working on some coaches. We're working on the coach of the Sporting women. Wow! A Danish coach that just won the league there. So but we haven't had them on. So we should have. So if you have a good one, please help me.
Yeah, I would say even people like I was talking to the other day, Rebecca, who's working at. She does Watford Academy. She's doing a PhD. I'll send you her details.
Sure.
And she actually did a doctorate in investigating elite coach mentoring.
Okay.
Basically, and how coaches learn.
Yeah.
So again, because I think there's another element there, isn't there, of representation? You know, how many we always have these guys on, but you know, how often do we get the females on as well?
Yeah. The main argument I have there is everybody that's good needs to have the spot, and there are a lot of women that we are going to be impressed with. So I think that's the main reason to get the people out there and get them in the right positions.
100%.
Okay, so we have two good names, and we'll make sure you get the details once we are off air.
Yeah, great. Love it.
So far, I want to thank you very much for sharing. I love the passion that you're showing. And I'm really looking forward to the 28th, because I know we're going to have much more of an insight in your story and in this specific part of your knowledge. So that's when we're going to see the real Pracademic, I think.
Yeah, there you go.
We're going to see the Pracademic coach education. So I'm really looking forward to that.
I can't wait. And thanks for seeing it up that way. It's no pressure. No, it's gonna be.
Yeah. Well, I like to put the pressure. No.
Exactly. No, I agree. It's going to be interactive. They're not going to be lectured. There's going to be group tasks. There's going to be loads of videos, like you said, videos of games, videos of coaching sessions, and it'll be interactive, and it'll be good to see where the conversation goes. I mean, I'm a big organic, so I like things that evolve and emerge. So let's go for it.
Great. Well, we'll see you then. Thanks.
Thank you.
See you later, man.
Top man.
Bye.